What happens when our heroes aren't born to save the world, but to destroy it? This haunting question cuts to the core of two of the most compelling characters in fiction, Paul Atreides and Eren Yeager. Both are driven by visions of a better future, but their journeys reveal a harrowing truth. They aren't heroes in the way we might expect. Instead, they're bound by the weight of prophecy, the crushing inevitability of fate, and the devastating consequences of power. In this video, we'll explore the heavy burden placed on their shoulders, from the curse of seeing a destiny they can't escape, to the irresistible pull of becoming the Messiah that makes them symbols of hope and destruction in equal measure. We'll dive into the moral ambiguity of their choices, where heroism and villainy blur beyond recognition, and uncover the cost of wielding unchecked power, a cost that strips them of their humanity, their loved ones, and ultimately their freedom. Through Paul and Eren's stories, we'll dissect what it means to carry the weight of the world, and what it takes to break beneath it. Paul Atreides, son of a duke and a sister of the Bene Gesserit, was always destined to inherit power. Paul's fate is intricately tied to the Bene Gesserit's long-laid prophecy of the Kwisatz Haderach, a super being they've spent generations attempting to breed. One of many prophecies across the galaxy was planted on Arrakis. It speaks of a Messiah, the Mahdi, who will lead them to a green paradise. This prophecy is part of a carefully laid plan by the Bene Gesserit to allow for the greatest chance their prophet will rise. However, Paul's birth was a defiance of their original plan by his mother, Jessica. The question is, was she giving her husband a son out of love, or actively trying to produce the Kwisatz Haderach? Jessica's intense emotion and fear during Paul's test by Reverend Mother Gaius Mohiam make it hard to believe she would intentionally risk her son's life solely for the slim chance of him becoming the Kwisatz Haderach. Leto desired his son to inherit his dukedom, understanding the political danger the Atreides house faced far before their move to Arrakis. Leto's love for Jessica as more than just a concubine suggests that Paul being born male was a dutiful act of love rather than a calculated decision. Regardless of the true answer, Jessica's decision made Paul both a part of the prophecy and a potential threat to the Bene Gesserit's ultimate goals. Fate seems to play a significant role in Paul's story. The hands of fate may have guided events, knowing the right conditions would present themselves for Paul to rise as Kwisatz Haderach, if he was strong enough to survive. This is echoed in moments like the sandstorm after the Atreides massacre, where Paul surrenders to fate, allowing it to carry him and Jessica to safety. Fate, more than deliberate intention, seems to shape Paul's journey to becoming Muad'Dib. Paul's prestigious genetic heritage makes him naturally predisposed to prescience. Combined with his Bene Gesserit training, he can glimpse potential futures before ever consuming spice. Before arriving on Arrakis, he experiences visions of Chani, which are fascinating because they don't reflect who she is in reality. Chani appears as an idealized figure, soft, angelic, bathed in light, smiling and winking at Paul. However, when we meet her properly in Dune Part 2, Chani is far from this image. She is a strong, independent young woman with her own beliefs and convictions. These early visions shaped Paul's perception of Chani, causing him to fall in love with her before they even met. Some argue that their romance feels unconvincing or rushed, but in the context of Dune's world, it makes sense. Dating as we know it doesn't exist in this universe. Instead, relationships form based on immediate connection or circumstance. For Paul, a teenage boy seeing visions of a beautiful girl who later becomes real, the attraction and bond are inevitable. His initial visions of Chani not only anchor his emotional journey, but also play a critical role in guiding him to Arrakis, setting him on a path to fulfilling the prophecy. The Bene Gesserit prophecy becomes a powerful tool for Paul and Jessica to manipulate the Fremen on Arrakis. Jessica, with her extensive Bene Gesserit training, steps into the role of the Reverend Mother, leveraging their belief in a Messiah to gain their loyalty. Yet Jessica wasn't initially aware of the Fremen ritual involving the Water of Life. She was essentially forced into it when faced with the ultimatum of performing the ritual or death. At that moment, the choice was automatic, if it was a choice at all. But after surviving and transforming to poison, Jessica changes. It's as though the experience awakens a side of her that did choose to birth a son in order to fulfill the prophecy herself. She begins to see the way and encourages Paul to drink the Water of Life, pushing him further into his prophetic role. Paul in turn uses the prophecy strategically. He demonstrates his awareness of its manipulative power when he tells Jessica,
"I must slay the non-believers."
Half the Fremen already see him as their messiah, and he uses their faith as leverage, pandering to the skeptics by claiming he is not the one they seek, all while subtly reinforcing his position, drawing on the wisdom imparted by his father. Paul seeks to become Fremen and wield their desert power as a tool to avenge House Atreides. Yet in doing so, he inadvertently aligns himself more closely with the prophecy. Ultimately, both Paul and Jessica walk a fine line between using the prophecy and being used by it. Jessica's initial lack of control over the circumstances contrasts with Paul's indirect approach, but both are swept along by the larger forces of fate. Even as Paul manipulates the Fremen's belief system, his visions guide his choices, steering him towards outcomes he may not fully understand or want. The prophecy, initially a tool of manipulation, becomes the framework of their reality. Paul's visions give him glimpses into the future, but also windows into alternate realities. He continues to see visions of Jamis, a man he killed, but in another timeline, Jamis showed him the way to be Fremen. He begins to see the destruction he may cause as the Kwisatz Haderach, as well as the death of his loved ones, leaving him uncertain about which visions to trust. This uncertainty comes to a head during the attack on Siege Tabra. Paul has a vision of bombings and finds Chani horribly burned. He wakes to the sound of bombs falling, just as in his vision, and frantically searches for her, fearing his worst nightmares come true. But he finds her unharmed. Relief quickly gives way to the grim reality of their home being bombed and destroyed. Paul realizes he must decide to protect his loved ones and prevent more bloodshed. Overcome with grief, he weeps, mourning the person he's leaving behind, the boy who was once simply the Duke's son. He decides to join his mother in the south, knowing this will set him on an irreversible path. Paul understands that drinking the Water of Life will solidify his role in the prophecy. His visions, once a source of guidance, have now sealed his fate. By choosing this path, he ensures that he will gain the knowledge and power to lead, and that there will be no turning back from the destiny that awaits him. Paul's decision to drink the Water of Life highlights his complex battle between free will and fate. On one hand, he chooses to act in response to his visions, suggesting agency. On the other, the inevitability of his prescience makes it feel like he's merely fulfilling a predetermined path. The tension between these forces reflects an overarching theme of Dune, the struggle to navigate personal choice within the confines of destiny. Throughout Dune, Paul struggles to find his own path, as his father urged him to do, yet by the end, he can't escape fate or the prophecy. This raises the question, did knowing about the prophecy ultimately lead to him fulfilling it? Potentially. When ideas like the Bene Gesserit prophecy are embedded into a civilization over centuries, when religions, ideologies, and fundamentalist beliefs take root, it creates a system where someone eventually rises to fill the role. The Fremen's faith in the Messiah isn't new. Paul isn't the first, nor would he likely be the last to fit their vision. If it hadn't been Paul, perhaps it would have been someone else, decades or centuries later. Or maybe the Kwisatz Haderach would never have come, and the Fremen's dream of liberation would have died out. But for Paul, the choice is far more personal. His determination to preserve House Atreides and honor his father, Duke Leto, narrows his options. The weight of the prophecy pushes him into becoming what he never wanted to be. What makes his journey so tragic is the glimmer of hope that keeps him going. The belief that despite the destruction he foresees, he might be able to change it. Paul's humanity drives him to take the Water of Life, thinking that with more knowledge, more power, he can avoid the worst outcomes. But when the full truth is revealed, he realizes there is no avoiding it. To survive and save those he loves, he must lose his humanity and fully embrace the role fate has laid before him. In the end, Paul's hope is both his strength and his undoing, as it binds him to the path he so desperately sought to avoid. Eren Yeager's journey begins in a world ravaged by Titans, monstrous humanoid creatures that have plagued humanity for centuries. The survivors live in walled cities, protected by towering barriers that isolate them from the outside world. However, the true nature of the Titans and the world beyond the walls is far more complex and sinister than the inhabitants can imagine. The origins of this conflict lie far beyond Paradis, where Eren's story unfolds. Titans aren't mindless monsters. They're humans transformed through a dark power tied to the Eldian people, a race cursed with the ability to become Titans. The Eldians are oppressed by the nation of Marley, a militaristic state that exploits their Titan powers for conquest. Over generations, the Eldians have been reduced to tools of war, confined to internment zones, and stripped of their humanity. This cycle of oppression began long before Eren's time. Thousands of years earlier, Emir Fritz, the progenitor of all Titans, discovered the Titan power, passing it down through her descendants. Over centuries, the Eldians used Titans to build an empire, only to be overthrown by Marley, which turned the Titans' powers against them. The remaining Eldians were exiled to Paradis Island, isolated and trapped in a cycle of violence perpetuated by their power and history. Within this brutal system, Eren Yeager is born. Raised in the walled cities of Paradis, he dreams of freedom, unaware of the true nature of his world. His hatred for the Titans is ignited by the attack on his hometown, a catastrophic event that claims the life of his mother. From that moment, Eren vows to destroy all Titans, believing them to be the ultimate enemy. Eren's connection to fate becomes clear when he inherits the attack Titan. His unique ability reveals the path laid out for him, including the Rumbling, an apocalyptic event that will destroy the world. As he joins the Survey Corps and learns the truth, his simplistic understanding of heroism begins to unravel. This pivotal moment occurs when he touches Historia's hand during her coronation, unlocking the knowledge of the future and sealing his role in bringing the Rumbling to fruition. Eren discovers that Titans are transformed humans, Eldians like himself, and that their existence is the result of generational trauma and oppression. As he uncovers the history of the Titans and the role of the Marleyan government, Eren is thrust into a moral conflict that will define his fate. His naive desire to destroy Titans evolves into a deeper struggle against the cycle of hatred that binds his world. This cycle of generational trauma is central to Eren's story, and a lot of it comes back to Grisha Yeager, his father. Grisha grew up in Marley's oppressive system, where Eldians were treated as second-class citizens and forced into internment zones. His sister's death at the hands of Marleyan soldiers was a pivotal moment, radicalizing him and leading him to join the Eldian Restorationists, a rebel group fighting to reclaim Eldian power and overthrow Marley. This mission became Grisha's driving force. Grisha's radicalization mirrors Eren's through the death of his mother. Grisha's first son, Zeke, was supposed to inherit the Restorationist cause, but the immense pressure Grisha placed on him led Zeke to betray his parents and side with Marley. Zeke's betrayal wasn't just a political act, it was a rejection of the ideals Grisha imposed on him. In time, Zeke became a crucial part of Marley's campaign against the Eldians on Paradis Island, continuing the cycle of conflict from a different perspective. When Grisha fled to Paradis, he didn't abandon his mission. Instead, he placed his hopes in Eren, along with the founding Titan's power. Eren wasn't a passive recipient of this inheritance. Through the unique ability of the attacked Titan to connect memories across time, Eren was able to influence Grisha's actions. Grisha's decision to take the founding Titan from the Rice family wasn't entirely his own. Eren's will reached back through time and played a key role in shaping that moment. This interaction highlights how interconnected their fates are. Grisha's decisions were shaped by his past and his own trauma, and Eren's drive to acquire the attack Titan was shaped by the ongoing cycle of violence that initially drove Grisha to act. Eren's determination ensured that Grisha would act as he did. The attack Titan's ability allowed Eren to further perpetuate the cycle, aligning his father's actions with his own desires. Eren's fate isn't isolated. It's tied to a chain of events set in motion by Grisha and influenced by Zeke. Grisha's role in the Restorationists, his relationship with Zeke, and his decisions on Paradis all form the framework for Eren's path. However, as we learn more about Grisha's past, we realize that Eren's will has been influencing the story far before Eren was even born.
Save Mikasa and Armin.
The inherited will of Eren is the mechanism through which these fates are interconnected, showing how the past shapes the future in ways that can't be easily broken. Eren's story is one of self-fulfilling prophecy. The Attack Titan's ability to send messages through time traps Eren in a paradox. He is both the creator and the victim of his circumstances, pushing his father to act in the past to secure the future he now realizes is inevitable. This backward and forward flow of events ensures that Eren's fate is not entirely his own, but rather the result of a cycle that predates him. The systems of violence that dominate this world ensure that each generation inherits the trauma and rage of the one before it, driving them to repeat the same destructive patterns. Eren Yeager's story is deeply intertwined with the unique abilities of the Attack Titan, a power that serves as both a symbol of freedom and an instrument of fate. Eren's ability to access memories across time blurs the line between free will and predetermination. His primal drive to acquire the founding Titan is not born in isolation. It's a product of the oppressive world he grew up in. Eren's environment, steeped in violence, fear, and the trauma of his mother's death, fostered his innate desire for strength and freedom. Eren's initial drive for vengeance transforms as he learns the truth about his world. His desire to escape the confines of fate and history only entangles him further in its web. The rumbling becomes his ultimate act, not as a choice, but as a compulsion, a predetermined outcome of his power and knowledge. Eren Yeager's journey is a story that transcends time. It unfolds backward, forward, and in cycles, reflecting the paradox of his existence. His power to see the future locks him in a loop of inevitability, ensuring that no one in his world has true free will. In the end, Eren loses himself to the prophecy he fulfills, leaving behind a legacy of tragedy. A boy who dreamed of freedom but was never free. Both young men were born into circumstances beyond their control, into worlds that are cold, lacking humanity, and built on inequalities that cause suffering. Worlds that demand and need a savior figure to bring them out of the dark, out of pain, suffering, and death. Worlds oppressed by greedy, power-hungry groups, whether it's the Marleyans or the Harkonnens. This could be any group. It's a symptom of humanity. Even in distant futures, greed survives. If they were born into less harsh worlds, maybe they wouldn't need to fulfill their roles. Maybe Paul wouldn't need to fulfill the prophecy of the Mahdi. He wouldn't need to be the Kwisatz Haderach for the Bene Gesserit. If it weren't for generations of hate, discrimination, and genocide, Eren wouldn't be compelled to move through his young life impassioned by vengeance. He wouldn't be compelled to manipulate the gifts of the Attack Titan to manifest his truly darkest wish. While both young men took steps toward the deaths of many, all while being hailed as saviors, their free will was an illusion. It was the worlds they were birthed into that wrote their fate. Both young men attempt to correct the course they know they're on, a course toward death and destruction, but they're ultimately unable to. In their hearts, they're both teenage boys who just want to live and love their loved ones. And ultimately, it's their love for the people in their lives that drives them toward their fate. It's almost as if the hands of fate use these human emotions as a means to get their way. Paul's need to avenge his father against the Harkonnens drives him to lead the Fremen towards the jihad. The death of Eren's mother and the love of his friends lead him to the rumbling, knowing that his friends are the only people who could stop him and have a chance to live out their lives. The difference is interesting, with Paul being born into power, a power that eventually renders him powerless, and Eren seeking out power only to lose the only thing he ever wanted: freedom. Before we get into the next section, I want to take a quick moment to ask you to subscribe to this channel and like the video if you're enjoying it so far. By subscribing, you're not only supporting me, but you'll also get a say in what topics you'd like to see next. So hit that subscribe button and let's move on to the next section. In 1883, Friedrich Nietzsche introduced the Übermensch in Thus Spoke Zarathustra as a philosophical figure who transcends traditional morality and forges a path beyond good and evil. In the 1880s, Nietzsche was witnessing the rise of secularism and the decline of religious authority in Europe. He argued that without the anchor of religious values, humanity was at a crossroads, either cling to old fading beliefs or create new values from within. The Übermensch, or Overman, isn't a conventional hero or savior. Rather, Nietzsche imagined an individual who creates their own destiny, unshackled by societal norms or inherited morals. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, this figure is framed as the next step in human evolution, a symbol of potential greatness and transformation. But Nietzsche's ideal is double-edged. This self-overcoming requires incredible sacrifice, demanding that one abandon all security in tradition, comfort, or conformity. The Übermensch must be willing to bear immense suffering as they redefine what it means to be human. Paul Atreides is perhaps one of the clearest reflections of Nietzsche's Übermensch in modern literature. From the moment he drinks the water of life, Paul ascends beyond the limits of ordinary humanity. In surviving the ritual, Paul achieves ultimate prescience, gaining the ability to see countless potential futures. Yet, this godlike power doesn't free him. Instead, it restricts him. His expanded vision locks him into a narrow path, a single route that will lead him to fulfill the prophecy of the Mahdi and ignite a jihad across the universe. Paul's Overman-like transformation comes with an acute awareness of this paradox. In gaining the power to foresee all possibilities, he loses the freedom to choose among them. His prescience reveals a path toward the vanquishing of his enemies and his ascending to the throne as Emperor of the Imperium. But he also must lead a violent holy war. He foresees that denying this path could lead to the ruin and the suffering of those he loves. Although he resisted this fate, hating the very idea of the jihad, Paul succumbs to his role as the Fremen's prophesied savior, accepting the narrow path prescience forces onto him. But Paul finds himself unable to forge his true path. Far from freeing him, his transcendence traps him in a destiny he despises. Through Paul, Dune explores the tragic irony of the Messiah complex. In becoming something more than human, Paul is forced into a role that robs him of the agency he sought to achieve. Nietzsche's Übermensch ideally creates their own values, but Paul finds himself unable to forge his path due to the very power that was meant to liberate him. Eren Yeager embodies the tragic pursuit of Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, striving to transcend the oppressive world he was born into. From the beginning, Eren's yearning for freedom drives him to seek power. First to destroy the Titans, the immediate symbols of his captivity, and later to dismantle the systems that perpetrate humanity's suffering. However, this pursuit transforms Eren into something far removed from the ideal of liberation he once envisioned. The Übermensch represents the pinnacle of human potential, transcending traditional morality to create a new order. Eren's journey echoes this ideal in his rejection of inherited ideologies and his willingness to chart his own path, regardless of the cost. Yet, where the Übermensch strives to bring meaning and creation, Eren's rise to power leads to destruction and despair. The strength he gains as a Titan, a power he is neither emotionally nor morally prepared to wield, becomes a tool of apocalyptic violence. Eren's naive vision of killing all Titans as a means of liberation is supplanted by the grim reality of his actions. His version of the Overman unleashes the rumbling. Far from achieving freedom, Eren's power perpetuates cycles of death and suffering on a scale that is unimaginable, making him the harbinger of the suffering he sought to avoid. Ultimately, Eren's story is one of sacrifice. His actions aren't solely driven by nihilism or hatred, but by a decision to create a future in which his friends can survive. By shouldering the weight of countless lives, including his own, Eren ensures the end of the Titan curse and a brighter future for the world. His sacrifice blurs the line between savior and destroyer, hero and monster, leaving a legacy as both the breaker of chains and the architect of unimaginable loss. Paul and Eren both embody the complex archetype of the reluctant overman. Their journeys diverge significantly in what they reveal about their worlds and the moral dilemmas they face. Each character's transformation reflects not only a personal evolution, but also the starkly different cultures, values, and existential threats of the societies that shaped them. Both Paul and Eren are seen as prophetic figures, destined to bring change. However, where Paul's role as the Mahdi is deeply ingrained in religious beliefs and rituals of the Fremen, Eren's journey has no divine prophecy to guide it, only his internal compulsion for freedom. Paul steps into a role meticulously crafted by the Bene Gesserit through selective breeding and cultural manipulation. He inherits a religious fervor built to ensure obedience to a messianic figure. This makes Paul both empowered and entrapped by a destiny he recognizes as artificial, one designed by forces beyond his control. Eren, on the other hand, is driven by the raw, unstructured desire to break free from oppression. His path lacks the divine legitimacy that Paul's has, which imbues Eren's mission with a more chaotic, personal motivation. The lack of guiding prophecy for Eren's transformation also makes his role as savior more tragic. It's a role he carves out of necessity rather than one laid out for him by higher design. This difference highlights the contrast between their worlds. Dune society is steeped in organized religious tradition, while Attack on Titan's world is a struggle with constant existential threats that breed radical, often uncontrolled responses. Paul's journey is marked by a constant tension between his will and the expectations imposed upon him. As the heir of House Atreides, he is conscious of his duty to avenge his father and lead the Fremen, even if it means sacrificing his desires. Paul's selfhood becomes submerged beneath the weight of duty and the inevitability of his visions. His struggle is to find agency within a prophecy that seems to have already written his life's script, leaving little room for personal desire. In contrast, Eren's agency is driven by his own convictions. While Paul resists his role as the Mahdi, Eren pursues power and freedom with relentless determination. Yet by pursuing these ideals so single-mindedly, he becomes ensnared by his desire for vengeance and freedom, ultimately losing the sense of self he was trying to preserve. Both characters find themselves stripped of their freedom, Paul by the prescriptive nature of his visions, and Eren by the realization that his actions led him further from his goal of liberation. In the end, both grapple with the irony that the closer they come to achieving their visions, the more they lose their sense of agency. In the end, Paul and Eren reveal the dangerous allure of the Messiah complex. Both characters expose the paradox inherent in messianic roles. By ascending to godlike status, they find themselves alienated from the humanity they once cherished. Paul's journey in Dune reflects a society where order and hierarchy dictate fate, while Eren's story exposes the brutal chaos of a world that rewards only strength. The Messiah complex is not a pathway to transcendence, but a cage fashioned by fate, prophecy, and the expectations of those who see them as saviors. Nietzsche's Overman is supposed to break free from societal constraints, creating meaning beyond imposed beliefs. Yet Paul and Eren show us that when this transcendence is imposed through prophecy, destiny, or societal demands, the power of the Overman becomes a burden, chaining them to actions they can't escape. The weight of history, trauma, and power corrupts even those with the potential to overcome. In worlds built on cycles of violence and oppression, Paul and Eren represent a grim twist on the Übermensch, trapped by the very powers that should have set them free. What makes a character tragic? A tragedy is defined not just by unfortunate circumstances, but by the inherent flaws, decisions, and external forces that propel them toward their undoing. Some of the most profound explorations of tragedy in literature come from William Shakespeare. Among these, Othello stands out as a case study of moral complexity, where a noble character is undone by both his internal vulnerabilities and the external forces that manipulate him. Othello's story exemplifies the destructive power of jealousy, insecurity, and the fragile nature of human trust, elements that also mirror the tragedies of Paul Atreides and Eren Yeager in their respective narratives. Othello the Moor of Venice is a man of great honor, strength, and integrity, but his tragic flaw lies in his overwhelming vulnerability to manipulation and his own insecurities about his identity. As a black man in a predominantly white Venetian society, Othello has always felt the sting of being an outsider, and this sense of otherness becomes a critical part of his psyche. His tragic flaw, however, is his jealousy, exacerbated by his profound insecurity about his wife, Desdemona, and his fear of being dishonored. This internal flaw makes Othello susceptible to the manipulations of Iago, whose jealousy and malice push Othello toward a series of irreversible decisions. The tragedy lies in the fact that Othello's insecurities are amplified by Iago's cunning, and he allows his emotions, especially jealousy, to cloud his judgment, leading him to murder Desdemona in a fit of rage, only to realize too late that he's been deceived. Othello's self-doubt and misplaced trust in Iago catalyze his tragic end. His fatal mistake is believing that the forces around him, his social status, his worth, and the affection of his wife are fragile and easily shattered by the doubts others instill in him. In Othello's case, the tragedy is not the villainous plot itself, but in the fact that Othello's own internal flaws make him vulnerable to manipulation. His deep-rooted insecurity about being other and his unchecked jealousy are both a product of his identity in a society that constantly marginalizes him. His tragic downfall arises from the intersection of these inner vulnerabilities with the malicious external forces that prey on them. Paul Atreides' tragedy lies not in his fulfillment of the prophecy, but in his unwavering belief that he can subvert it. His prescience, unreliable and fragmented, gives him hope that he might chart a path to protect his loved ones, particularly Chani, and prevent the horrors of jihad. This hope drives Paul south, seeking the enlightenment of the water of life. A desperate attempt to gain true sight and uncover an alternative future. His love for Chani and his desire to shield her from harm compel him to take this dangerous step, believing that greater clarity will grant him the power to forge a peaceful resolution. Yet the moment Paul survives the trial of the water of life, he's confronted with the futility of his hope. His newfound prescience reveals not freedom but inevitability. The jihad will come, and his role as the Mahdi will seal this violent fate. Paul's realization marks the point where he loses himself. He sees the path laid out before him with perfect clarity and understands the terrible cost of continuing forward. Yet he can't bring himself to stop. If he doesn't fulfill this role, no one else will, and the chaos unleashed will be even greater. Paul's internal conflict becomes the heart of his tragedy. He's torn between his love for Chani and his responsibility to the Fremen, whose fervent belief in him fuels their desire for holy war. His extraordinary gifts don't liberate him, but instead become the chains that bind him to a violent destiny. In trying to protect those he loves, Paul becomes an agent of destruction, knowing that the jihad he inspires will claim countless lives and spiral far beyond his control. The weight of his role comes crashing down when Paul, with a heavy heart, orders the Fremen to lead them to paradise. He knows these words will set billions of deaths into motion. It's the dejection of a young man who once longed to be a noble duke, now reduced to a genocidal emperor. He's forced to accept his place in a monstrous cycle of history. Paul's voice carries the weight of inevitability as he accepts the crushing reality that the future he sought for himself and his loved ones is no longer within reach. What makes Paul's story so poignant is his gradual understanding that his personal desires are irrelevant in the face of the greater forces at play. The love and hope that once defined him are eroded by the weight of his inevitable fate. Despite his immense power and intelligence, Paul can't escape the destiny that traps him, a destiny shaped by prescient visions, inherited prophecy, and the religious fervor of the Fremen. His tragedy is a stark reminder of the cost of hope in the face of an inevitable reality, and the impossible burden of trying to bear the weight of the future alone. Eren's tragedy, on the other hand, begins with his belief in his own exceptionalism and his desire for freedom. From the beginning, he imagines himself as a hero, someone who will avenge his mother's death and protect humanity from the Titans. His journey is driven by a deep burning need to gain power, not for conquest, but to free those he loves from the oppressive world they live in. However, his tragedy is revealed when he learns the truth behind the attack Titan. His belief that he was destined for greatness, that he was uniquely chosen to bring about change, is shattered when he uncovers that his path was not one of choice but of manipulation. To acquire the power of the attack Titan, Eren must face the horrifying truth. He's destined to kill his own mother to gain this power. His longing to avenge his mother ironically leads him to destroy the very person he sought to protect, losing not only his mother but his sense of freedom. Eren's decision to go through with the rumbling is a tragic act of self-deception. He believes that by taking control and using his power to destroy humanity's enemies, he can liberate his friends and the world. However, in doing so, he condemns himself to a future of isolation and hatred, unable to escape the tragic irony of his actions. His freedom becomes an illusion. As his power grows, so does the chain that binds him to a path of destruction. The ultimate tragedy is that his quest for vengeance and freedom culminates in him losing both his humanity and the very thing he sought to protect. Both Paul and Eren are tragic not because they lack agency, but because their agency is manipulated and constrained by forces outside their control. Paul's belief in his ability to protect Chani and his people despite knowing the future is a self-deception that traps him. He is unable to reconcile his desire for peace with the brutal future his powers reveal. Similarly, Eren's belief in his ability to change the world through violence is shattered by the realization that his path was manipulated from the start. Paul's tragedy is bound to the prescriptive nature of his visions and the pressures of his heritage. He believes he can navigate his path with love, but he's ultimately ensnared by the very knowledge he sought. Eren, on the other hand, believes that his power will grant him freedom and control, but instead it forces him into a cycle of violence and self-doubt. Their tragic flaws, Paul's misplaced trust in his visions, and Eren's blind belief in his own mission, reveal the painful truth that while they may have started with the desire to protect those they love, both are ultimately caught in a cycle they can't escape. Their tragic journeys highlight the devastating effects of self-deception, the burden of destiny, and the false belief in control over a world that is governed by forces much larger than they are. All three characters, Othello, Paul, and Eren, are undone by flaws and external forces that converge to shape their tragic destinies. In each case, their tragic flaw and the manipulation of forces beyond their control create a moral complexity that leads to their ultimate downfall. Through these stories, Shakespeare, Frank Herbert, and Hajime Isayama explore the timeless theme of how human flaws, when magnified by external pressures, can lead to tragedy. In the pursuit of power, both Paul Atreides and Eren Yeager lose their innocence, their humanity, and ultimately, their souls. Their stories reflect a central theme that is echoed throughout history: the high cost of ambition and the sacrifices made in the quest for control. A compelling myth to illustrate this theme is that of Faust, a man who, in his hunger for knowledge, wealth, and power, makes a pact with the devil, trading his soul for everything he desires, only to lose it in the end. Like Faust, Paul and Eren are consumed by their aspirations, not realizing until it's too late that the power they sought would strip them of the very things that made them human. In Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust, the protagonist, Faust, is a scholar who, dissatisfied with the limits of human knowledge and the constraints of ordinary life, strikes a deal with Mephistopheles, the devil. Faust agrees to sell his soul in exchange for unlimited worldly knowledge and power. He wishes to transcend human limitations and experience life in its most intense and exciting forms. However, as Faust ascends into this world of pleasure, wealth, and success, he is gradually consumed by an inner emptiness and the knowledge that these achievements can't fill the void in his soul. Ultimately, Faust's pact with Mephistopheles is a tragic one, as he loses not only his soul but his sense of self, becoming a puppet of his own desires and the forces of fate he unleashed. Faust's downfall parallels the fates of Paul Atreides and Eren Yeager, who similarly seek greater power to change their worlds but ultimately lose themselves in the process. Their journeys are marked by an irretrievable loss of innocence and selfhood, a cost that they must pay for their ambitions. When we first meet him, Paul is still just a boy. He's sharp and perceptive, but he's young, watching and learning from the people around him. Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, His mother Jessica and Duke Leto, they're not just mentors, they're his family. They shape him, prepare him, and give him the tools to carve out his own destiny. And for a while, it looks like that's exactly what he's doing. Paul becomes part of the Fremen community, not as some conquering noble, but as one of them. He wants to honor their culture, live peacefully with Chani, and prove that the Fremen are more than the galaxy's idea of rats. Paul's vulnerability grows as much as his power does. Feyd-Rautha's rise and the Harkonnens' hold on Arrakis put the Fremen at a massive disadvantage. He can't afford to make a mistake that could cost the people he loves their lives. So when he drinks the water of life, he doesn't just unlock ultimate prescience. He trades his innocence for it. He sacrifices his humanity without even realizing it, because in his mind, winning is the only option. Killing the Harkonnens is the only option. And that brings us to the end of Dune Part 2. Paul has everything he set out to achieve. Power, leadership, revenge. But it comes at a price he can't take back. The moment when he offers his hand to Princess Irulan. That's not the Paul who dreamed of protecting Chani. That Paul wouldn't have knowingly hurt the person he loved for a political move, no matter how right it was. By then, the boy we met at the start of the story is long gone. Even Chani doesn't recognize him anymore. Paul's toll is in how much he loses of himself. His love, his hope, his idealism, they're all stripped away as he becomes exactly what he feared, a ruler of destruction, locked into a destiny he can't escape. In chasing power, he didn't just sacrifice his humanity, he killed the Paul he used to be. Eren Yeager's story is a cautionary tale about the cost of power, split into two distinct paths. The first is the life of innocent Eren, a boy driven by simple desires for freedom. In this timeline, Eren grows up unaware of the true nature of the Titans, the power within him, or the larger role he plays in his world. His goals are pure, even naive, to destroy the Titans, explore the outside world, and protect his loved ones. He's oblivious to how deeply intertwined his fate is with the forces that have shaped his reality. But this innocence is shattered when Eren touches Historia and sees a glimpse of the future. This moment births a new Eren, a young man burdened with the weight of what his subconscious will has set into motion. Unknowingly, innocent Eren has already influenced the events leading to his mother's death and his path to obtaining the Founding Titan. Once Eren becomes aware of this, he initially clings to hope, believing he might prevent the catastrophic future he's seen. However, this hope falters with Sasha's death, a turning point where awakened Eren realizes that the future he glimpsed is inevitable. From here, Eren makes the painful decision to embrace his role in ensuring that future comes to pass. He chooses to follow the path of destruction, knowing full well the suffering it will cause. The cost of his power becomes clear, his humanity, his relationships, and the dream of freedom that once defined him. Eren's tragedy lies in the duality of his story. The boy who once wanted to save humanity grows into a man who destroys it. His initial desire for power, to protect his loved ones and secure freedom, leads him to perpetuate the cycle of violence he once sought to end. By the time Eren sets the rumbling into motion, he's no longer acting as the hero of his story, but as a servant of fate, carrying out the will of his subconscious self. The cost of power for Eren is more than the lives lost or the devastation wrought. It's the loss of the person he once was. Innocent Eren dies the moment he sees the future, replaced by someone who sacrificed everything, including his own soul, to fulfill a destiny he never asked for. Eren's story serves as a stark reminder of how power, even when sought with noble intentions, can warp and consume those who wield it, leaving behind a legacy of destruction and sorrow. Eren and Paul's journeys are deeply tragic not only because of the lives they take and the futures they shape, but because they're still just boys, thrust into roles far beyond their years. Neither had any place shaping the fates of their world, yet both were drawn into battles that robbed them of their youth. The innocence and carefree moments that make childhood so beautiful were stripped from them as they pursued power, leaving them to experience only fleeting glimpses of levity and happiness. Paul's burden as the Kwisatz Haderach forces him to become a ruler and a symbol far too young, shattering any chance of a normal life. His brief moments of joy, his love for Chani, the thrill of victory, the satisfaction of survival are swallowed by the endless demand of the jihad he can't escape. For Eren, the path is similarly harrowing. His early days of camaraderie with Armin and Mikasa, his simple dream of freedom and the bonds of friendship he cherished, are slowly eclipsed by his growing role as humanity's destroyer. Both boys are robbed of their childhoods, their innocence replaced by unbearable responsibility and irreversible choices. Their stories still relate to Faust because the power costs far more than it's worth. Yet, unlike Faust, Paul and Eren never had the luxury of adulthood or wisdom before making their fateful bargains. Their sacrifices carry an even heavier weight because they're sacrifices made in the fragility of youth. They're boys forced to act as gods, and in doing so, they lose the very thing that made them human. Ultimately, their lives remind us that immense power is no gift. It's a thief. It steals not only the lives of those it's wielded against, but the humanity of those who wield it. For Paul and Eren, the cost of power is not just their freedom, morality, or peace of mind. It's the fleeting, irreplaceable beauty of their youth, and in their loss, we're left to question whether these sacrifices can ever be truly justified. Paul Atreides and Eren Yeager are not just tragic characters. They're mirrors reflecting the cycles of violence, oppression, and ambition that shape our world. Through their journeys, we see how power can transform even well-meaning individuals into figures of destruction, how noble intentions can lead to catastrophic consequences when ambition, trauma, and societal pressures take hold. In their stories, we recognize patterns of real-world history. Genocidal leaders and tyrants rarely rise from nowhere. They're shaped by the worlds they inhabit, by systems of oppression, hatred, and unchecked ambition. Paul and Eren remind us how easily charismatic figures, burdened by visions of a better future, can be consumed by the very systems they sought to change. They become both symbols of salvation and harbingers of destruction, driven to extremes by forces far larger than themselves. These characters serve as cautionary tales, not just about the dangers of power, but about the environments that create it. Paul's galaxy, fractured by political manipulation and greed, Eren's world, defined by centuries of generational trauma and hatred, show us how cycles of violence are perpetuated and how they inevitably lead to suffering. As much as these stories captivate us with their epic scope and complex characters, their true power lies in how they force us to reflect on our world. They ask us to consider how systems of oppression are built and maintained, how hatred and violence are passed down, and how the pursuit of power can corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals. What do you think about Paul and Eren's journeys? Drop your opinions in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. If you want to support the channel further and get exclusive content, consider joining my Patreon. And if you're into music, be sure to check out my band. One of our songs is playing now. Links to the Patreon, my music, and all other social media is down below in the description. Until next time, thank you so much.